Hello and welcome to StatGDP podcast from atoms to ethics. Here with Fool Me Twice and my co-host.
Where is my couch?
Where's my couch? How you doing today? Where's my couch?
It's all right. It's another day looking for my couch. Unable to find its whereabouts. But it's all right because that's life. Can't always find your couch, you know?
Right, it's that never-ending journey, but that's what keeps us definitely on the forefront of whatever's most important, that pressing issue, to find one's couch. And today, we're wondering, where are we going to get our couches? Are we going to get it from the Furniture Mart? And where is it going to be produced? Is it going to be produced from Sweden? Is it going to be an IKEA couch? Where are we going to get our goods? And are the tariffs going to be affecting it all that much? Maybe. I mean, if you assume that whatever is currently being put in as policy is permanent, then maybe this is the beginning of something bad, because President Trump today in February now announced new tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and China. Obviously, those are some of our biggest trade partners, Mexico and China, and also Canada, possibly in that order. But he's imposing 25% blanket tariffs on Mexico and Canada and a 10% tariff on goods coming in from China. So that could shake things up a lot. We don't have very high tariffs, I guess, blanket on those countries currently, but it could result in retaliatory tariffs. You could argue this is the beginning of a trade war. But as we saw last week with the Colombia incident, Trump walked back his tariffs a bit because Colombia budged on the whole issue of getting their citizens back who were deported. They budged and had the president say he was willing to use his presidential plane to take some of the deportees. And additionally, Trump announced that Venezuela has agreed to receive some deportees from the U.S. as well, following a meeting with Maduro of Venezuela. So a lot of things are being shaken up right now. We may have to see if those tariffs going in place raises prices on some of these goods that we pay for with some of our largest trade partners. So, of course, the mainstream media narrative on this will be that it is going to be bad economic times. They're going to be doubting our futures at this point. Everything is going to go up, and the policies that are put in place are going to be permanent and they will not work, because in some parts, tariffs are taken to be a bad word. But I guess we'll see what happens with this. What are your thoughts on that situation with these new tariffs, 25% on Mexico, Canada, and then the 10 on China?
Well, I forget what percentage of our actual import comes from these three nations. I feel like it's probably a good majority, right? So,
yes.
I mean, it's like over 80%, 90%. I'm not even sure, but like, well, I still think in terms of the big picture, like the same thing I always thought, which is, well, we're trying to convince ourselves that we can be self-sustainable, and it starts from cutting off other resources, and the easiest way to cut off other resources is to raise tariffs on those goods coming in. And I think this is where we're headed. Is it the end of times? Is it the end of America as we know it, or something like that? No, it's probably just a transition into something that is more sustainable, ultimately. At least that's how it's attempted to be seen as, and that's kind of how I'd like to see it, because then otherwise probably don't have much hope. I mean, if this is some sort of reactionary thing in order to band-aid fix a certain economical or financial I don't know, blunder of something that we don't know about, then we're pretty screwed. But I think this is actually positive. I think this is actually some proactive attempt to regain power in terms of our economy. But it might just result in, half a decade to a decade of some turmoil, which is to be expected. That's what I think.
Right, and there's also the issue of perhaps we feel we have less leverage over China with their economy being the largest of the three that Trump is imposing tariffs on, because he's only willing to go 10% on China, but he's willing to go 25% on our next door neighbors. So perhaps he feels we have more leverage over Canada and Mexico than on China, and that therefore any kind of trade war type situation would be shorter and would result in faster responses of them lowering their tariffs on us, or them protecting their own borders with us, in a greater manner than he's currently happy with, which many Americans are not happy with, the border situation, at least going into this year. And, it hinges, on border protections and security as well, and not just equalizing all trade barriers necessarily, but putting 25%, it doesn't necessarily mean everything will go up 25% that comes in from those countries. Yes, it would mean that everything would go up 25% if we responded by doing absolutely nothing. But as with anything, it's a differential function. Everything is a response to the current situation, right? So any drop in the advantage of buying foreign will increase the incentive to buy domestic, which if it's more expensive, that's not a good thing in the very short term. So it could be decently troubling sounding in the very short term. But as with anything, economics type kind of goes very quickly. Things and investments can go quarterly, that we can, invest more in manufacturing at home, and we can always manufacture stuff at home if we have the resources, which we do have a lot of resources. It depends obviously a lot on climate and that kind of resource. We don't have the exact same climate as Mexico or Canada in a lot of places, but we do have maple trees. It's not like we can't get lumber in the U.S., and a lot of things we can make in the U.S., and we're probably more capable of manufacturing things than we currently are, because we used to do it more, right? We used to be a manufacturing powerhouse, and then we decided we're going to get cheap goods from abroad, and that'll be better for us because we can focus on other things, on becoming advanced, right? So everyone kind of wants this advanced, post-industrial, fancy job now where you don't have to do as much hard labor, you could say, but a lot of manufacturing, because I've worked in this field, in terms of manufacturing plants, a lot of it has a lot of automation, involved in it that makes it not that difficult, like in terms of putting too much stress. I mean, we do have a lot more safety regulations in the U.S. than some other countries, so we do have certain barriers where we can't manufacture for extremely cheap, but it's because we have more regulations, and it's more expensive to hire American probably than to hire from Southeast Asia or buy from Southeast Asia and a lot of places, Central American places. But we can still make stuff, right? We can still definitely manufacture stuff. I've seen plants go up, regionally. And there is a pushback, though, because this ties back into deportations, right? We have these deportations now starting in the thousands, particularly mostly focused on the people who are not only here illegally, but are criminally convicted of some violent crimes and things of that nature. So there are those that you see on the streets protesting, and I've even seen this in the Midwest here, where you see people with Mexican flags being waved and flags of Central America, maybe Guatemala, I think I saw, on one of the major intersections in town. And it was interesting to see because you didn't see any American flags. It was a lot of young people, a lot of, hopeful-minded young liberal, a lot of females, a lot of young, teens and high school-looking people who want some kind of cause. They want to be part of something greater than themselves, so they want to fight for the freedoms of someone. And I get it. It's like, if you're here illegally, you're doing what you think is the best for your family. You know what I mean? And
Right.
that just makes sense on their perspective. They want to be here so they can make higher wages than they would have in Central America and places. But it kind of portends to somewhat of this invasion type vibe, because they're not waving American flags. Like, they're waving the flags of other nations, right? So,
Well,
yeah.
I guess in the end of the day, as America as a nation only cares about whether or not immigrants stimulate the economy, and not whether or not immigrants actually respect America culturally for what it thinks it stands for. I think it's all a facade, and on some level, even America knows it. And ultimately, it's just some, injected pipe dream to get people to come here to stimulate the economy. And
Right.
oh, obviously, yeah, if you get them on the emotional front, like, oh yeah, American dream, this, that, then yeah, then they'll be driven to do something on a financial, economical front as well. So I think it's all a facade, unfortunately, but it works. Whatever keeps people happy, right? So that's yeah.
And when it comes to what some are saying regarding the fact that we need illegals because, well, the argument goes that nobody is illegal because laws don't describe someone's entire character as, by definition, illegal. Although if they are illegal crossers of a border, then they can be labeled illegal aliens. That's just the legal definition of it. It's not like everything they do within the country is inherently illegal or bad, but it's still something that needs to be prosecuted if we are going to have laws, which you could say that laws are kind of a hoax and it's all just however much it's enforced. But if you don't have any laws, why have any laws on the books even? Just don't enforce anything, right? Just live as the law of the jungle, or the law of might makes right, and the law of just the wild, wild west, where it's all vigilante justice, and like whatever fights and duels happen, unfortunately, they just go down the way they go down, and it's all just rule by mob, basically. So it's kind of a hard middle ground of like, if we're going to have laws, we might as well enforce them. They might not always be just. And I guess I would say that we have this interesting executive order that states that birthright citizenship should not be a thing and will not be enforced as any longer being a thing, because this has to do with the 14th Amendment, right? This had to do with, if you remember the 13th through 15th Amendments, these were back in the post-Civil War era where we were legalizing and giving citizenship to the enslaved or formerly enslaved, so they would have citizenship rights as United States citizens. So that's what it was intended for. But now we have people who are arguing that it implies birthright citizenship for all people born within this territory, within these borders, including those born of illegal crossers. So that's kind of a debate that's going on now, and obviously the courts and some of these more liberal-leaning judges have shot it down, and it may go up to the Supreme Court. But there are those who argue that there is birthright citizenship, and that we are automatically citizens simply for having been born within a certain territory. So what do you think of that notion, the notion of absolute birthright citizenship blanket?
Well, absolute birthright. I mean, all right. Well, first, sorry, I was going to go back to what you were saying about laws in general, right? I mean, like, laws to me are simply suggestions to maintain social order, but they're subjected upon the masses by a certain group of people in order to achieve what they believe is order. And I think the most real world example is like a street light. It's just a suggestion. It's not like if you run it, some shotgun's gonna pop out of it and like shoot you or something. It may or may not even have a camera on it. And the most that'll happen most of the time if you run a red light is that you just have this sort of feeling deep down that you did something bad. Right, but that feeling was conditioned into you by these suggestions that say you shouldn't go through the intersection when you're facing a red light. But what is actually, like you're saying, what is actually making sure that law is being implemented every single time you go out and consider whether or not you should stop at the red light? There's nothing, right? So it's just a matter of knowing from the entity subjecting these laws on the masses. It's just a matter of knowing that the majority of the individuals in this population will feel some sort of like I don't know, responsibility or accountability for their own society in order to like not run this red light because they don't want to accidentally hurt somebody or kill somebody that they don't know or do the same to themselves. And so it's also there's fear involved in it as well. But anyway, going back to birthright things, I mean, I think well, it's always just kind of been a suggestion in my opinion because like I still know people with no social security, with no
Uh-huh.
real documentation, who probably live as real of an organic life in this country as any American with paperwork would live. And ultimately, it's just, well, what legitimizes your existence in the area that you live in physically, right? Is it some organization or whatever external third party saying, "Oh yeah, we deem that you're a legitimate like member of this particular society that we've established as a nation," or is it just how you feel in terms of how integrated you are? And I would argue that there are people with full-on documentation like myself that don't feel as integrated as somebody who just came here illegally without any documentation. So I don't know. I still look at it on the level of it's just a suggestion, and it's all just BS to like get everyone to like riled up for like no really good reason. Because ultimately, the economy is still going to have to rely on people who are not, permanent citizens and don't have familial history, a generational history in a certain nation. I mean, those are always going to be the people who make the biggest difference during an economic crisis. And it's just a matter of convincing the locals to be okay with it, which they never are, they never will be. But if the locals win on something like that, then I think the nation might lose, right?
Well,
So,
if you're saying locals who, being citizens, would have to
yes.
pick up slack and work harder, you're saying, would imply that we could either work harder as citizens or have this permanent so-called underclass of slave wage labor of people who are not on the books as much and don't have as much leverage on the system. So I would say that the system is less honest when we don't enforce law, and it kind of implies that the law, like kind of like you're saying, doesn't really matter or mean anything, but it only means something once we actually decide to try to enforce it, I guess. So that kind of is like a two-pronged situation there. Like you can either say the whole system is BS, which it is, or we can say we as Americans need to work harder and actually pick up the slack of those that we think should be serving us and that we supposedly describe as the ones picking the crops or whatever. But at the same time, as the bishop who gave a certain sermon that the White House was not happy with on the first day of the inauguration, as she was saying, the ones picking their crops, are fearful because they might get deported. I think we should be the ones picking the crops. I mean, maybe not you and me literally, but those of us who go through a certain phase of deciding we're going to be in the workforce when we're young and we're able physically and can work hard labor, like we should come up learning how to do things that are kind of hard, I guess. And sometimes that has to do with kind of taking a low wage position or learning how to produce for yourself, So in a transitional period, we could actually still pick up all the slack of those we think are going to have to always be here, so-called illegally, if we have a transitional period where we have a more in sync government system that's actually more enforced, or just enforced kind of organically, meaning kind of not enforced. But you're making an interesting point about the whole birthright citizenship thing with respect to the fact that some people might feel more integrated or less integrated, and that might not even feel necessarily locally correlated with whether they have the documentation to be in the country, right? So that's an interesting point, but what it sounds like you're implying as well there is that birthright citizenship shouldn't even really be a thing. Like, as Americans, we should work harder to do the jobs of those we think are supposed to be doing jobs for us at low wages, and we should be able to, or have to, earn our own citizenship, right? By that, I mean, I was just born here, so me being born here doesn't make me feel like I particularly earned my own citizenship at any given time. You know, I already had legal citizen parents, so I was a citizen. So that means I was granted birthright citizenship. So those of us who were born here already kind of have this biased incentive to also favor birthright citizenship as any anchor baby would, which some consider a pejorative term, but it just means any child of an illegal who's a dreamer or whatever, right? So in a way, I am my own dreamer because I was granted the citizenship from being born here. Now, do I deserve that right? I'm actually saying no. I'm actually saying I should have to earn my privilege of American citizenship. What do I have to do? Well, whatever service to the country we decide that means to be a citizen, whether it's working for some kind of public service, being in the military, for a couple of years, whatever it takes, including passing some kind of citizenship test, at least as difficult as anyone else would have to earn their citizenship from abroad, right? So I guess what I'm getting and gathering and implying from what you stated is there should be no birthright citizenship.
Well, not on this political level, that basically what you're getting at is, ultimately, we as Americans have to, like you said, realize our abilities as, I guess, manual laborers or whatever it is that we think we're outsourcing to, immigrants and whatnot. We have to realize that it's not like frowned upon to be doing these jobs, that it's integral to our society, integral to the nation, integral to the foundation and the rigidity of the structure of this nation, in order for us to all be able to stay in line and stay in touch with these abilities. But one thing that that I've been thinking about lately, actually, is that because I believe in like propaganda and whatnot, and the stuff that we get fed as a nation, like the people get fed this whole notion of, yes, like MAGA, make America great again, but we don't get fed any sort of propaganda in terms of, work harder on a farm or like ruralize the nation, or like nothing like that. It's all just, hey, like if we convince the world to like tokenize the dollar, then we'll be rich. So it's almost like, in a sense, it's almost like a Band-Aid fix in that, again, you don't have to do all the organic, nitty-gritty, dirty work as citizens in order to maintain the nation. We might still have an out, in terms of slotting ourselves, like a chess piece or something in the perfect position in front of all these nations so that we maintain our power, but almost like in an inorganic fashion. I just can't see the organic direction that we would have to go if we wanted, all American people to be more in tune with, hands-on labor by like 2035 or something. It just doesn't look like we're on that trajectory, you know what I mean?
Right, no, yeah, it does not, because many of us, perhaps ourselves included, still want to live this glamorous style of life where we get to try, at least attempt to aim to be something higher, something that we think is easier, more convenient. And the thing is, we kind of have to have it both ways. We kind of have to know the physical toughness of reality and the mental toughness of reality to understand the big picture. So in order to be the greatest possible versions of ourselves and as our communities and as a nation, I think we have to understand the limits of physicality and mentality in order to have the best possible social structure where all citizens somehow understand the whole of just how hard it is to maintain a civilization that makes itself greater over time and does not collapse, because that's a hard thing, right? Anything that gets greater by the subjective feelings of its own citizens is a really difficult thing to maintain, because at some point all civilizations historically have had some kind of collapse and revolution where it needs to revitalize itself. So yeah, on that note, the whole birthright citizenship thing is interesting because I think blanket birthright citizenship perhaps is not the greatest idea. Maybe we all need to earn our own citizenship, and there's not really any system in place where we could conveniently do that within the laws as they're set up right now, But personally, I think I would totally be willing to give up my own citizenship in order to put a system in place where all of us have to re-earn our own citizenship. And it has to do with, you have to not hate the country, obviously. You have to want to be an American citizen and mesh with the culture. You have to want to be an American. You can't come here or be here and want to just exploit, because we have to make ourselves all great together, right? It's all one nation, so that means if we are a nation, we have to be one people and somehow see the bigger picture in fulfilling our duties, I guess, to each other and to the nation, if the nation will continue as it is in the union that it is. So, going back to the 14th Amendment, it states, right, as I'm reading here, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. So a positive phrase there, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, is a touchy one, because that's where the subjectivity lies. There are those who say, well, anyone born here is automatically a citizen because it just said that, except it stated those subject to the jurisdiction thereof. And going back to what you said about law, it's like, who's subject to what jurisdiction exactly?
Right.
If you come in illegally, or if you're just born here, the kind of two polar opposite perspectives of, me, someone who's born here, and the illegal who comes here looking for whatever they can get, work or better life or whatever, or sometimes, as Trump stated in his famous first political speech in 2015, rapists, and some, I assume, are good people, Going back to that, it seems that it depends what your jurisdiction is. If you're not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, if you're breaking laws, if you're breaking with the principle of the jurisdiction within the country, then why would you be within the jurisdiction when you're making the case that you're above the law, right? So on that perspective, illegals would not be citizens if they have a kid born here, but maybe those of us who break laws who are citizens on the other front wouldn't be citizens necessarily as well. So if you take a very strict approach to this constitutional amendment, maybe none of us have earned fully our own citizenship, I guess.
Well, I mean, isn't that kind of what they say about America in general? It's like no one here within the last 350 years deserves, 300 years actually, deserves any kind of quote-unquote citizenship or permanence or feeling that they belong to this land kind of thing. I think, I guess that's kind of what it is, right? It's just, everyone here basically belongs to,
a tribe.
Some tribe, or on average belongs to wherever their parents came from, right? Or their grandparents. It's not disjointed by two at most, right? It's it's not really American, I guess. I don't know how else to put. There's no other nation out there that just has this amount of diversity in this short amount of time within its history, right? And then while still seemingly trying to blindly unite everyone. It's the closest I can think is Singapore. It's you have all these East Asian sort of cultures meshing with one another, but it's not like they go out and try to unify everybody. There's like these pockets, there's
Yeah.
like Thai town, there's Japantown, Koreatown, the Chinatown, blah blah blah. It's not like this huge saturated mass of like I don't different shades of people kind of thing. So in that sense, I don't think it's possible to attain the same kind of feeling of a nation here as any other nation out there would be able to like provide for its people. I think here it's like the best you can do is be okay with who you are, where you are, and be okay with all these other random people arguing about other random people entering the nation. It's like that's all this is. It's like because there's so much change, like there's no ability for any one reference frame to like stabilize and go steady state, that you might as well just admit that at any given point things are going to be changing beyond the point of like what most people are going to find comfortable, essentially, and there's just going to be a lot of complaints about like everything from all fronts. But like I guess you can say that about any economy or society, but I feel like it is just worse here.
Well, we're more
Somehow.
globally integrated and have more numbers of immigrants total and numbers of cultural diversity in terms of race and all, and than
Right.
any other country in bulk, at least. Maybe not by
Okay.
percentage necessarily in every country, but at least in bulk numbers. And that makes it tough, right? Because now you're getting to the characteristics of a nation here. And I go back to the 5 characteristics of a nation, basically, that a nation just happens historically throughout history to be a certain race of people, a tribe with a certain culture, who believe a certain religious or spiritual
Right.
viewpoint, enclosed within a certain border or boundary, who speak the same language. So, unfortunately,
Mm.
we don't really have that as a United States because there is no American race, because there are those, like, as you implied, there were races of people here more than 350 or more than 400 years ago, but the United States itself was founded by these eastern coast colonies from Britain and
Right.
other places like Spain and France, and then there were some Germans, and there's like large post 1800 kind of immigration from the European continent, and then later, early 1900s, late 1800s, you get some Asians coming to the West Coast. We have obviously the trans-African and Caribbean slave trade, also going back to the 1600s. So you have this large wave of people coming in from Africa, first against their own will, and then in the last 100 years by their own will. In fact, that's a weird fact about American history you might not hear too much, is more Africans came here willingly than unwillingly, because of the
Right.
recent surge in immigration from Asia and Africa. You do meet people from all over, even in the middle of the country. You meet tons of Africans. I mean, a lot of people, up in certain places in the Midwest where it's very diversified, and not everyone likes that because, unfortunately, this just goes back to my definition historically of a nation, that once you get too far away from homogeneity in race, culture, religion, and language, then you try to stuff a whole bunch of people within a certain border, and that's only one characteristic of a nation. If they don't all share the same culture or the same values as far as what constitutes citizenship or citizenry and civics, being a good citizen within a certain country, then it kind of ceases to actually be a cohesive country at that point, right?
Yeah, I mean, just because everyone's coexisting without like absolutely killing each other physically and like eluding doesn't mean it's a country. I mean, it's just like, where do you draw the line? I mean, because the threshold can be pretty high for, actual uh, just straight up psychotic looting and whatnot. But like, I guess what was I thinking about? I guess I'm just thinking about more analogies, basically, where I guess my number one analogy would just be Disneyland or Disney World. Like you have all these people from different backgrounds and cultures meeting up in this one spot that is kind of like this dreamland where everyone goes into it knowing that it's dreamy, that everyone else who goes there also sees it as dreamy, and everyone's when they get there, everyone's kind of in this weird dreamy bubble, this facade of like, oh, everything's gonna be good because we're in Disneyland, or like everything's fine because we're in America, or whatever. It's almost that kind of thing, but is it really
Right.
fine? I mean, Disneyland's just like, set up. Well, if you really want to peel it, like it's just like a whole bunch of dark animatronic things that
Right.
like lie to you all the time, and like crazy 20-year-old ladies who like got treated like 12-year-olds since they were 8 or something, and they're just like have all these
Right.
creepy smiles on their faces, and they look really happy on the outside, but really deep down they're all miserable, and you kind of know that, but you want to lie to yourself and say, hey, I'm feeling down. I just want to come here and forget it all and just feel light about things, right? It's like other people from other countries, oh man, this war is crazy, or like my government's super oppressive. I just want to like chill. Oh, there's like this America thing where like everyone just kind of goes there. It kind of feels like this vacation country or something for like nations who are that are super oppressed or whatever. And it's like, oh well, let's just go there and like work and bring some money back, right? And it's never like this stay permanent kind of mindset. It's like you don't go to Disneyland thinking like, oh, let's just go stay there, like
Yeah, that'll solve our problems. Like, is it
yeah,
really that small
yeah.
of a world after all? I
No,
mean,
it's yeah,
I
exactly.
like the ride. It's got all that
Yeah,
diversity in there, but
right,
does everyone really get along all that well? Like in that tunnel,
right.
it's a
Yeah,
small
yeah,
world
yeah,
after all. I don't think
yeah.
so,
No, no, yeah,
unfortunately.
yeah. Nice, nice. Yeah, taking the analogy further. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, like basically, right? So, I mean, that's kind of how I see it too. So America is just the Disneyland, but in the country form, in nation form.
And
And
this,
so no one
yeah,
comes here with the mentality of they want to stay here. They just want to get what they can get and get back out and go back, quote unquote, home, wherever that was. And so I would say that their quote unquote home was some kind of nation that, they actually identify, with culturally, traditionally, whatever it is. And so, America can't be it. I would say, for most people in America, especially in the big cities, it's really hard to say that, oh, yeah, I'm you know, pure-blooded American kind of thing. It's like, no, I don't know if I feel that way. It's like I don't know that many white people, man. I'm just gonna be honest.
right. Well, some areas it's kind of mixed, almost half and half in the major cities, or if not, it kind of white people are the minority, and obviously some cities,
Right.
especially some, maybe Philadelphia, and then some areas in the Southwest, obviously in the West Coast. Um, but others, it's kind of like slight majority, and it's kind of trending towards maybe everyone being a minority by the mid 2030s or so, if not at least by 2040. Everyone will
Oh
be a
yeah.
minority by then, effectively. And the thing about that is, unfortunately, and for millennials, it's already everyone is a minority, I think. The people, or at least the people being born right now, nobody is the majority within that generation. Everyone is a minority. And unfortunately, as much as we are told that diversity is our greatest strength, we are told it so much it's kind of like comical at this point. The whole DEI thing is something that there's
Oh
been a bit of a backlash towards. It's obviously a very big topic. It was talked about during the press conference Trump had during his speech and afterwards on the plane crash with the helicopter
yeah.
in the D.C. area, in Arlington, Virginia area. And with respect to DEI, though, if diversity is our greatest strength, then why does nobody want to be a minority? It kind of feels not too great, I think, because most people want to be part of the majority, part of the norm, and part of the mainstream culture in order to feel fully validated as far as their viewpoint, maybe whatever, their skin color. People say things these days like, well, I want someone in that position who looks like me. Then I could be thought of as someone who could also attain that position. Although that kind of goes against that whole Gandhi quote, right, of be the change that you want to see in the world.
Mm.
Like, you could be the first of whatever. So anything is possible. So just because somebody of your race didn't occupy that particular position, whether it's president or whatever job before, doesn't mean it's not possible, because you could be that person. But
Right.
anyway.
No, true, true. Um, but the change is hard. Change is scary. A lot of people can't. I guess just dive straight into that pool of change. They rather just dip their feet in a little bit, get scared, and then scoot back out of the pool and just be like, well, I guess I'm okay. Being where I am, just enough to satisfy. Just to reach the threshold every morning when I wake up and every night before I go to bed, just enough for me to stay content, and that should be enough or whatever. But I guess, yeah, I guess that's another topic. But just in terms of self-perpetuated contentness, it's almost like a hell for me. But anyway, a lot of people are doing that, and but going back to the whole identity thing, and well, in terms of identifying your nationality and whatnot, here in America, I guess, I guess I don't know what a true American is. Like what the definition of a true American is. Is it somebody who, genealogy wise, has been here like the last, like, for as many generations as possible? Is that a true American? Or is a true American somebody who's like an immigrant who like went from like rags to riches or something within America, using this American dream system that it touts within itself so much? Like, what is the quintessential American?
Yeah,
And
so
what does
this
that person look like?
gets into, well, what was the founding of the country, right? So the founding of the country itself, not just the geographical land bridge crossing of the American Indians who have been here much, much longer than anyone else, supposedly than people from East Asia and from Western Europe and all. But in terms of the founding of the country as the way that we state the documents in the Constitution and the way that it was founded in the revolutionary fashion, it was against the British, and it was these former British and white European folks who founded the nation, right? So in principle, if you really want to get down to it and state we're speaking English and we have this Constitution that comes out of the whole English Bill of Rights, Magna Carta based. And I'm going back to, this is still the history of modern thought as far as the Western European influence of things, and going back to Rousseau, John Locke, Hobbes, and all these philosophers and people from the French Revolution, and all these principles that we kind of grow up learning about as Americans in history classes in high school and some of us in college. There are these principles that suggest that, well, America is at forefront a white nation in some sense, which obviously sounds very, very bad and sounds like a white supremacist talking point from those who would oppose such a statement, and it's kind of not something that you're allowed to say in polite society, but it kind of feels that the mainstream American culture is effectively the white culture, and that those who are not therefore feel, as in the fact that they're minorities, feel like they are outsiders to the mainstream culture. So in a way, those who agree and disagree with the notion of it kind of point it out, and in my opinion, the idea that whiteness is seemingly the norm, at least for now. And on that note, it just seems that there are those who argue that this nation is this Judeo-Christian nation. There are those who also argue, as I'll talk about what J.D. Vance said lately, he stated that there's this ordo amoris, which is this order of, I guess, love or something in Latin, and it means the hierarchy of obligations that we have to each other, which means you start at the family level, then obviously it's the local community, then it goes up to the state and the country, and then fundamentally it's whatever you believe spiritually or whatever, so relationship with the spirit or the God or whatever, then it's your family and everything up from there. So tying that into this, it's like there are those who state that although we have a separation of church and state supposedly with First Amendment rights, although that's stated in a state document and constitution, so it's like you never fully get away from separation of church and state, and at some level it still goes back to it being a nation based on these 5 characteristics that I previously mentioned, right? A race of a certain culture and religious belief within a certain border, speaking a language. So going back to the earliest definitions of what the United States was declared as when it was independent, it was these British colonies of white people. So that evolves over time as we've had more immigrants, and it started off as well with 15% slaves from Africa in certain areas. So it varies, but it's hard to separate it from that, I guess. At least there's definitely a bit of a pushback with respect to those who would like to deport all illegals, who are probably disproportionately non-white, although there are those who came in illegally from Europe as well. So
right.
That's kind of the vibe, I guess, is how a lot of people say it, although a lot of people don't want it to be that way. But to me, America is principally from the forefront. If you start when America decided to call itself America and declare independence, it was these European East Coasters.
Right. So, according to, all right, yeah, the forefathers of America, it's I can see how it was majority white because European settlers were majority white, and those are the people who came here. And they could have looked like anything, but they happened to be white. So, what if? I guess the question as a millennial is, what if it was just up until from then until 2000s when we were teenagers, it was the dissolution of this whole America equals white or white equals America thing, and now we're at the point where you're saying there is no majority, right? Even including white. So that means that times have changed, and in order to if we had to define again in this very moment what it means to be American, I don't think yes, we can look back and say, well, in the 1700s and late 1700s, it was all British people, mostly British descendants, and they all looked white. But right now, but what did they want? They wanted at least they allowed for diversity over the last 250 years. I mean, it's not what they wanted exactly, but at least whatever laws that transpired, until now, made it so that the nation is the way it is now, and there's no actual racial majority. So that means now we have to reconsider what it means to be truly American, right? And I guess this is kind of what I'm thinking about, and I don't know if internally people are okay with that just yet. I mean, maybe everyone wants it on some level, but everyone in the back of their mind, even though they don't want to think that white equals America, that there's still part of it. It's still ingrained, right? It's this a lot of this country. You still see remnants of that everywhere, obviously, of previously white dominant America, even in structures and things and signs and stuff that are even created in the 90s, essentially, right? It was still, I would say, the racial bias didn't really start to dissolve until we were in high school, college kind of thing, right? It was this really active, push towards neutralize kind of neutralizing all social expectations between the races that were in America, because it got to a point where it was too much of a mixing pot for everyone to think that this was still a white nation, basically.
Well,
right.
With respect to this whole diversity, equity, and inclusion thing, though, I would argue that there are those who still believe, even if they're not white, that one of the characteristics of a nation is a race. And importantly, I would say that having your own cultural icons as far as what you consider to be the flag of the nation and the national anthem of the nation, that's considered a representative part of your nation. That if you're going to play, for example, two different so-called national anthems at one of the biggest events in the nation, consider the Super Bowl, being considered such a big event in America, it's obviously watched by dozens of millions, if not 100 million plus people. And, not all of us care about it, but it is what it is, right? So at that event, apparently, since 2021, the Black National Anthem, known as Lift Every Voice and Sing, has been performed since then. And it has been performed in tandem with the national anthem of mainstream America, Star Spangled Banner, which maybe you could therefore point out as the kind of white national anthem that was made in the 1800s. So this other national anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing, apparently is a hymn written also in the late 1800s, adopted by the NAACP and used as a rallying cry during the civil rights movement. So there are those who are in this country who see their own nationhood as coming out of the civil rights movement and have their own national anthem. That's kind of a racial solidarity that points out the fact that country is race, I guess, or at least that once we get so diverse that we feel like we're not a majority anymore, we try to break off into our own nationalistic groups founded upon race, perhaps even having separated, kind of segregated, graduation ceremonies at universities. This is also kind of a thing that's popped up as millennials or as Gen Zers over the last few years have been in college. Yeah, separate graduation ceremonies by race. And, of course, there's a mainstream graduation ceremony for all races. And it's not like universities are founded on a certain race, usually. There can be historically black colleges and universities, right? But it's not like you are not allowed to go there if you're not a certain race. It's just historically been that way, right? So.
Oh, I thought you were saying they're going back to that. I was like, oh, boy.
Well, effectively, in some places, they are going back to it. It's just that it's not like mandated. It's kind of this thing where those who want to have a separate one do have that in certain cases. And so that's why, in my opinion, there's been such a pushback against this DEI notion that we cannot be one nation, I guess. It's like, how do you square things? Like, I think I still see the naturalistic definition of a nation as being based upon a race. Like, I see the argument that we have to get with the program of that we are here. If we're going to decide that we have birthright citizenship and everyone is part of the nation by default, then we kind of have an unworkable situation, because those who don't want to be minorities, which is effectively everyone, because nobody actually likes being a minority, in my opinion, we break off into our separate groups wherein which we are still majorities within those minorities. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. I guess a nation should be unified, and what is the source of unification? I guess that is the debate. But humans are organically inclined to want to categorize based on skin color, and that's just some naturalistic instinct, right? It's like, oh, that thing's darker than me, or that thing's a lot lighter than me, or like, that thing's purple, and it's like somehow we've combined the two concepts and kind of latched on to as humans we've sort of highlighted some sort of really natural organic trait as the indicator as to what, on a very high level social concept, structure, like makes us a nation, right? And it's like, well, the two things don't go hand in hand, but we're never going to realize that, probably. It's like you can't take some natural thing that you were born with that you can't have any control over to try to unify a set of organisms that all think differently on different levels about the same topic. And even if you said, in my opinion, even if you got all the things that looked alike on the surface together, it doesn't mean they all think. Right. It doesn't mean they have to think the same way either. Right. It doesn't automatically make that entire society more unified.
Right. It doesn't automatically make that society great again.
Right. It doesn't automatically make that society great again. Exactly.
But is it worth trying is the question. And
is
maybe
it worth
those within certain sects, and it's like it goes deeper than just skin color, though, right? And it's like not supposedly the case in terms of polite society, because we have to pretend that no speciation event can, happen at a deeper level than Homo sapiens, that we cannot consider subspecies of Homo sapiens, not in terms of lower species, subspecies, but just more specific species, that we're all subspecies of whatever species we're a part of, right? We're all subspecies of the human race. And there used to be other humans, and Homo erectus, Homo habilis, and the Neanderthals, right? So there are other races or other species of humans, but we're all this part of one race of human that can all reproduce with each other for the most part, but which may constitute separate subspecies in terms of types of diseases we might have, and perhaps other physical characteristics that, as someone who does not have, for example, the hair characteristics of a certain type, I would be found as being extremely awkward, walking into a certain type of, salon, a certain type of barber. Although personally, I just cut my own hair, so I would never have that issue anyway. But there are certain types of shops where they're catered to specific nationalities, and it happens to be totally fine as a business because they are catered to who they consider to be their target audience, who they consider to be their people, right? Meaning, maybe it's not illegal to walk in if you don't have a certain type of hair, but you'll just be looked at as if you're crazy. You know what I mean?
Right. And you're not going to want to go there because you feel like that place doesn't know your hairstyle or your hair type as well in order to give you the best type of cut. Right. So I guess that's what they say about a lot of black barbers. But anyway.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I'll go to one. I'll pay good money for one if I had that kind of hair. But unfortunately, I don't either. I have very manageable hair. But anyway.
Yeah, so would that ever happen? I think for the most part, it's considered somewhat extremist to break off into your own sect of your, most secessionist movements are considered relatively extremist, although the whole Idaho and Oregon and northeastern California state of Jefferson movement is talked about as something that might be put on some balance in certain areas, although it would be really difficult. I think they would need to have the states that they're in also agree to the secession of the state to create its own 51st state of Jefferson, and it's really difficult, right? It takes a lot of agreement among a lot of disagreeing bodies, and that's not even talking about culture. That's only really talking about people who all agree in the same kind of rural area of the eastern part of the West Coast states and western Idaho, perhaps, or whatever part that would be considered the borders of the state of Jefferson or the greater state of Idaho, or whatever they would want to do. But even within perhaps a similar culture that gets them motivated to break off into their own sect or their own state, it's still really legislatively difficult and kind of hard to see it happen because, as we've seen, no new states have formed in the last 60 plus years. So apparently it's pretty difficult.
It is very difficult. And actually, I have something to add about the state of Jefferson thing because I was looking at some other articles about it. And then there's all these different accounts of the farmers up in the Jefferson area stating that they're getting basically priced out of the land that they've owned for generations. Like, the taxes are basically being raised on them to ridiculous amounts. Like, one guy was saying they're paying 2 or 3 times more on property tax than they were just pre-COVID. And so so basically the state is pushing out all these people who want to, a secession, basically, right? So it's starting to look like they're losing that war, unfortunately, but hopefully, it doesn't end up that way. Hopefully, some sort of, I don't know, hopefully they get something out of it, right? But it does look like they're all getting pushed out financially, unfortunately.
Right, so it turns out to be a very difficult thing, and we see other things with respect to foreign policy. We see the Panama Canal with Trump stating it is being violated. Somebody in Panama is violating with respect to allowing China perhaps to trade with it somewhat, and we kind of still want this Monroe Doctrine of stay in your lane, other continents. We have the ability in the U.S. to, restrict other nations from trading in these areas. I guess it's however much leverage we have militaristically. If other nations are going to trade across Central America, we can't stop that unless we really escalate with having more bases and having more militaristic threats. So, I don't know, it might be kind of a bad thing to kind of escalate on that forefront, but at the same time, we do see other nations that are superpowers flexing and trying to expand, like Russia and China. So it kind of makes for kind of an arms race of escalating tensions and us wanting to pursue Greenland and try to get out in front of Denmark and try to get Greenland to declare their own independence so that we can negotiate directly with them instead of having Denmark sell it to us, which they don't want to do. So anyway, I guess I'm going off on some different tangents on foreign policy, but this is all kind of up in the air, and it's just a really interesting era in general as we head into the mid and late part of this decade. So it'll be interesting to see what happens regardless.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like we mentioned before, the next 4 or 5 years are going to be pretty interesting. I mean, there'll be a lot of, international policies and whatnot that get solidified. And we're just going to have to slowly come to terms with the changes required, to reach steady state. And it'll just be really interesting to see what those changes will be. And I just can't help but think about the backlash and the pushback and all that. But, it has to happen, in order for something that big to happen in a nation. I mean, possibly the biggest shift that you and I have ever seen in our lifetimes, basically. And, it just takes time to brew. And then, it just gets to the point where the lid has to blow off. And at that point, it's going to be really interesting, basically.
Right. So now, since today President Trump imposed the tariffs on these three nations we mentioned earlier, we do have retaliatory tariffs from our neighbors from Canada and Mexico. So we do have a bit of a trade war going on now. We do have an escalation of this, and to me, it's not going to be permanent. It's going to be a flex of who is more dependent on whom. And I think the bigger nation probably is going to have more leverage. So kind of by default, Canada may suffer and Mexico may suffer more than us. But again, it depends on how much we want to deal with deportation, which we apparently want to deal with a lot. And it's however we respond to the necessity for us to change our economic dynamics and invest more in doing more for ourselves on the manufacturing base and with respect to the jobs that a lot of Americans supposedly do not want to do, because that is often the argument of why we need, slave wage class non-citizens. Unfortunate terminology to use there, but that's kind of how a lot of us view it in terms of wanting these services at a lower cost than Americans would be willing to work for. But to me, it's only about kind of being harder on our young people and getting us as younglings to toughen up faster and kind of wake up and smell the coffee and just do more labor and not try as hard to be, I guess, just TikTok entertainers and things like that, where everyone kind of wants to be some rapper or some entertainer, where everyone kind of worships them as a celebrity without necessarily doing all that much hard work, because a lot of things are not that substantial and not that, a lot of entertainment is a thing, but at this point we're kind of so over-entertained and saturated with distractions that we almost need less entertainment that we consume, and we need more production that we actually produce, whether that's educational or entertainment. Like, we all want to produce and be that thing that's consumed as the greatest and the celebrity and the person who gets all the subscribers and the attention, where it doesn't really matter what you're actually producing. Just the fact that you exist somewhere, you're saying you're doing something at that place, you take a short video of what you're doing at that place, and it's like, oh, that's awesome. That person is the celebrity doing that thing at that place, which is totally normal, or maybe it's expensive, so it looks like lavish, like it's a vacation, and they're just bragging about how they're basically always on vacation, but just posting wherever they are at any given time, and it's like, nice, they are traveling the world now and living the dream, and everyone kind of wants to be getting in on that conspicuously consumeristic lifestyle of looking better on social media than their lives are actually going. And everyone kind of knows it's a fraud. Everyone knows it's a hoax. Everyone knows that there's this fakeness of the modern social media age. But it's like, how exactly do we pull back from that and get back to basics? It kind of has to happen gradually, I guess, but we could be in sort of a punctuated equilibrium, like kind of a slightly cataclysmic period of adjustment if these tariff adjustments have anything to say about it. Although I don't think they're going to be permanent. I think they're a negotiation tactic in order to incentivize more building at home instead of abroad. But yeah, I guess I'm going off on the same thoughts as earlier.
Well, I mean, again, it goes back to, what we were saying earlier about how I don't see any trending towards incentivizing DIY projects or, work on your garden or learn how to grow your own food. Like, nothing like that. It's all just TikTok, this and that. It's just really bland, surface level social media stuff that doesn't make me think we're on some sort of trajectory to get the average American to realize all the things that you're saying, like to get hands on and learn some organic, get all your organic traits back as like a self-sustaining human. Nothing like that. Like I just don't see. Somehow, like, we are perpetuating our own social media, obviously, and unless someone else is and is hacking us this entire time, and everything is we see on American social media is like provided by Russia or something. Assuming that's not the case, like, we are the ones perpetuating this idea of, oh no, it's okay, just like chill, and you might get like a stimulus check here and there once in a while. Like Medicare, we'll cover that. Like, just pay like $50 a month and cover anything with like like zero out of pocket or like a maximum of $1,000 out of pocket a year kind of thing, which is like you basically almost free to live with healthcare, right? And so in that sense, it's like, well, what's the incentive to go out and try to like a fight to sustain your own life anymore? It's like everything's basically taken care of on a survival point of view, without you even trying, lifting a finger, burning a calorie, nothing. So it's still like that, and I feel like it's going even further in that direction, while like we were saying, mega, right? And it's like, well, the only way then to make this happen, right, without the only way to realistically make this happen and to realize this without making it like an absolute like a hoax or something, is that as a nation we convince the rest of the world to still rely on the U.S. dollar somehow. I guess it still goes back to that. I hate to bring up like economy on that level, but like it still does come back to that. End of the day, it's like, well, how much can you convince other nations to still trade with you, right? And it's like, well, if you make them value your currency, it doesn't matter how good your goods are or how bad they are. They still have to use your currency in order to transact to get what they want from not only you but anyone else, right? So then ultimately that's what we're trying to convince everyone around us to do. And then meanwhile we're trying to like convince everyone from within of something in order to like maintain sanity and like not go like chaotic during the meantime, right? But like I feel like ultimately the big picture is just still trying to convince the world that we're worth dealing with on some level, and even if it means like bullying everyone else on some level, it's like, well, at least it makes it look like we mean it or something, right? And but then I guess internally it doesn't look like America's banking on its own people self-sustaining the country in the near future. Like, we're all going to be farmers, or we're all going to like learn how to build homes or something. No, it's not that. It's somehow like we're all just going to be good at some digital realm thing. It's
we'll monopolize AI, and then we'll be good because we'll just dominate AI at home.
Right. We as a physical nation might be identified by how front running we are in like this digital thing, which is super meta, right? It's like, well, we're this like physical nation, like with land with borders and stuff, with people who like have citizenship here but could be living physically in other nations, but like identify as American because they're supporting some system that is the front runner in like the digital world or whatever. And it's like, that's super meta. It's like, well, America just is no longer like encapsulated by like the physical landmass that we consider North America, like the upper portion of North America minus Canada. It's like, well, it's like anyone with like the legal right to say they were like of here or from here, and then like contributing to some like digital space on some level that like magas basically.
Well, and as you're saying, it's about convincing other nations to still trade with us. Right now, in the short term, with these tariffs, what we're doing by imposing those is convincing other nations to trade with us a bit less, actually, because
I
we are
know.
imposing these import tariffs, making it slightly less economically beneficial for other countries to dump their goods here, right?
Which is why I'm
So,
calling it bullying, right? And it's like, well, you bully them, and it's like, what if they just really wanted your goods to begin with? That they'll be like, oh, well, whatever, we're willing to pay a higher price or whatever price to continue, like the economy that we once had, right? I mean, it's like I guess it's a double-edged sword. Sure, you
right.
lose out on like goods, but they also lose out on their economy as well. And like, what's gonna get hit more? Us losing out on their goods, or them losing out on GDP? I think they're gonna lose out on GDP more than we're gonna feel like, oh man, we're losing out on like Alibaba or some Temu goods or something.
Right.
Like,
The thing
right,
is, we do not absolutely need tons and tons of imports in a lot of
right,
respects because if you have a large nation, it's got lumber in it, it's got food, all types of Mediterranean climate, California grapes and oranges and Florida orange and Idaho potatoes and corn all over and wheat like dairy and the beef, it's like chickens, it's like you have all the kind of food sources that you need, and then you have massive forests, so you have this forest management, and you have like raw materials in like Alaska and all these other places where we have oil, and then all these metals, and it's like we don't necessarily have all the lithium, that we need. So some products, it's like we do kind of need easier access to it from sources that are abroad, but for a lot of the raw materials, a nation that has as many climates and is as large as the United States should theoretically be able to sustain itself if its citizenry is well equipped enough mentally, physically, and just socially and spiritually to actually unite and actually provide everything that it needs for itself. And I'm not saying we don't need any imports so that we have to have 100% isolationism, but in theory, there is a way to do it, and maybe in a kind of ironic twist of fates, this whole economic incentivization against imports will force people to realize just how expensive they are to the point where everyone cares about money, so therefore we'll do what is ever in our most localized economic best interest and actually smarten up somehow, even though we are just kind of worshiping money. So it's like, can we ever really smarten up enough to become more self-sustainable while caring about money on the route to do it? It's like, is the end going to justify those means, I guess?
yeah, Oh man, I guess today's analogy day for me. I just keep thinking of these weird analogies, but like I guess one of them would be if the American government was like a rich parent of like a kid, and they all had like I don't know, slaves running the house or something, and the kid always grew up with dishes done for them, everything like the beds made for them, all the clothes folded for them all the time. So they're not worried about thinking about any of those things, but they still have some self-righteousness. They want to feel like they're organic humans, so they have an ego, obviously, so they feel like they're somebody, so they latch on to whatever it is that makes them feel important in society. But at the same time, the basic things are still being done for them, and the parent knows that, right? So the parent, in order to keep the kid happy, thinking that the kid's making a difference in the world, continues to like knows that they have to continue to tell this labor worker to do all the fundamental things for this kid while making the kid believe that they're doing it for themselves, because otherwise though that it would ruin their ego. It would be like, well, I'm a man, like I can do all the simple stuff like fold my clothes and whatnot, like
Right.
that, but they know that someone else is doing it for them, right? And it's like part of the whole spoiled thing. We're all spoiled in America, but we're spoiled by our government convincing us that we don't have to take care of our own laundry. We don't have to do our dishes, right? But they, at the same time, they know they have to get someone to do it, right? It's
Right.
like, well, in order to keep the nation afloat, we want to convince our people that they're living the American dream, but at the same time, that means someone else needs to be doing the actual nitty-gritty hands-on job, and we have to secretly make sure that this is sustainable, right? So basically, you want to the dumbest thing would be to actually get rid of all immigrants. So basically, you want to make sure all immigrants are still coming in at a steady pace while convincing your own people, the kids, this is fine. You want this, it's going to make your life easier. You're going to complain about it now, but you don't have to do the dishes, right? Like that kind of stuff, right? Like that's kind of how I see it. So anyway.
Wait, so you're saying that we are doomed and that we are always going to have the hubris of thinking we're entitled to more than we're actually willing to and capable of doing for ourselves?
That's the trajectory we're currently on, in my opinion. I don't.
Yeah, culturally, we seem to still be on that trajectory. Right. Yes.
Right. I obviously I'd want for us to go on the opposite direction, but from just seeing social media and the way people are reacting to it, it's like we're all still that spoiled kid who wants things done for us while having this hubris of thinking we've done it ourselves, right? So the only way to do that is for some parent to convince us that yes, you're doing it yourself, honey, while they know they're secretly getting someone else to do it, right?
Well, I think the parent should just be like, no more maids. You do your own dishes and your laundry.
Sure.
And just be harsher on our own kids, which I don't have any, but whoever does have kids, we might as well be harsher on them and not give in to these Mint Mobile advertisements of, oh, here's a program for your kid getting their first phone, Mint Mobile for kids or whatever. And it's like, well, that's the whole track of getting them on social media and getting the corporate gravy train going of everyone having a smartphone when they're 7, and having multiple devices, and therefore ending up in this rabbit hole of trying to just TikTok their way to success and just have everything be this immediate gratification-based distraction. And that's like the path to our own destruction, kind of like you're saying, I think. So we kind of need to turn away against that and somehow figure out how to revolutionize all parts of society, which is the greatest possible Herculean task we could come up with, but it kind of still needs to be done on all institutionalized levels, because it's like the whole education system. Well, most people don't come out of the education system particularly as equipped as they would like to with respect to what they need to do to just budget things, have employable characteristics, know what it takes to just have a job and sustain it and be able to easily not have to, freak out and swap jobs all the time and just not have enough sick time and just be right on the edge of living paycheck to paycheck and just being right on the edge of going bankrupt or just racking up all this debt and just not being all that fundamentally economically informed on a local or macroeconomic level, and just knowing all of these little tricks that have to do with whatever, 401k, matching this and that, and the things that adults figure out by living through adulthood, but never really felt particularly well equipped going through the education system that's supposed to be, in theory, turning our kids into good citizens, which means what these days? As I was saying earlier, we kind of never really earn our right to citizenship, and a lot of us grow up not even particularly liking the nation that we're a part of. We kind of are almost anti-American growing up because we learn that our nation's kind of bad. It's a colonial nation, so we learn all the atrocities that were committed, and we learn about these wars. And then we, at the same time, learn to have some level of patriotism, and that all countries have to have conquered their nation at some point through wars and tribalism and things that we portray as negative. So it's like this weird middle ground of how do we actually educate our kids, I guess, or educate our citizens, because I personally am a lifelong learner and completed a great deal of education, but never really consider myself to be totally done with education, because who would really say that they know everything at any given point, right? So it's like, how do we educate our citizens in general by culturally getting back to some kind of state of wanting to continuously learn and evolve in our viewpoints, to change how we view our things, to become closer in touch with the nature of reality and discover what real citizenship means, which in my opinion is more about the duties we have and responsibilities rather than the rights and the entitlements. You know what I mean?
Right. I mean, yeah, just a side note about, like, since you brought up education, I just remember, like, even when I was really young, like, I guess, like, fourth or fifth grade, whenever we started learning about American history, it's like, I just remember thinking, even as a kid, that, like, oh, like, other, like, America must be looking at his people going, like, hey, guys, I know everybody hates us, but hey, look at burgers. Look at Mount Rushmore. Like, look at, like, it's like that's like the vibe I had about the nation that I was in, like, since I was a kid. It's like, hey, I know, like, on, like, a realistic social, like, political economic front, like, everyone hates us, but hey, look at the cool stuff we got here. Like, and that's still kind of the vibe. You know what I mean? Like, that's still somehow perpetuated. They call it the American dream, or call it, like, this. But once you realize that, or once I realized that as an adult, and it's like thinking about someone from a different nation looking at that and just being like, wow, when a bunch of chumps who live over there. Like, I don't know.
Well, everyone still
I
wants to
guess
come here,
that's
so there's that. Everyone still wants, and not everyone, but many. U.S. has the most number of immigrants in the entire world, right? Legally and illegally. So apparently, we're relatively popular in the grand scheme of things, and everyone wants to join in on the gravy train of living the American dream,
right.
or coming here as refugees or as immigrants, seeking a better life, right? So as much as America gets a bad rap in the world, and everyone kind of has this meme of like hating the ugly American or whatever as a tourist, At the same time, I think some of that so-called hatred is actually kind of a jealousy aspect of America just happening to be that empire that it has been for like 80 plus years or so. So I think that yes, there are those who hate America, but I think sometimes it's better to be respected in terms of even maybe being hated or therefore being jealous of than to actually be liked, because at some point you want your nation to be feared enough that those who think they have more leverage over it actually don't once push comes to shove with respect to some of these tariffs or some of these NATO deals with respect to how much European countries need to contribute as far as their own military input. And I think we don't have an infinite gravy train, but we do have somewhat of one that a lot of other countries and their citizens would like to come join in on. So I think it's partly an aspect of jealousy, and I think there's a great amount of still like potential for us. So
Yeah, no, I agree.
I
I
think
think there's
America
a
kind of, sorry, but like wants to, it's like people want to hate America regardless of what we do. So if we're hated no matter what we do, then part of it has to be jealousy, I guess is what I'm saying. Like if we do things different, we're hated for it. Like why are we not falling in line with the rest of the world and doing it their way? But if we do it the same as everyone else, then we're called copycats. So to me, it's like kind of either way, we're kind of not going to be looked, explicitly highly upon by certain people, no matter what you do.
well, yeah, yeah, because I mean, we're kind of like trailblazing as a nation, and anytime you do that, you're the outlier amongst a bunch of other things within a subset that, like, wanted to stay within a certain proximity of one another. So it's like the person in office, like, relative to all the other previous ones in office. It's kind of like the outlier, and then obviously there's going to be a lot of backlash. But obviously, the same there's going to be a lot of pro arguments for it, right? So it's just a matter of which force ends up winning at the end. But I guess going back to what we're saying, I mean, just it looks like the outlook still looks relatively positive to me. Like, it still looks like, I mean, in terms of uh, America maintaining superpower status, it still looks like it's doable, right? Like, even if majority of us aren't convinced to do labor styles work in order to feel fulfilled and whatnot, in order to contribute to the nation and whatnot, I feel like there's still a way to sustain this, yeah, like, world power status. And I guess ultimately that's what it comes down to, right? Is that we don't want to feel like a second or third world before 2050 or or something like that.
Yeah, and that's a tough thing because large-scale superpower type governmental bodies and things seem kind of like the evil empire or something, so maybe we're an evil nation or something, but in a way it's kind of unfortunately this necessary evil because maybe on an individual level we can all point out, oh, there's corruption in these institutions that have so much power over us and the world and things, and the corruption lies at every single cycle within like individuals and communities and all the way up to nations and superpowers, right? And because the corruption loops, spread out infinitely basically, you can always point out that there are these corruptions in these large institutions, and because they accumulate amongst the actions of the members of those institutions, they accumulate to a very large amount. So we can always look at and point out the large-scale corruption that exists, which does exist. And so that is unfortunate. But at the same time, it's like anytime you have a power vacuum, the corruption will expand to the point at which it can expand, right? And increase so that something, if you take out the head of something, some other, entity that may be considerably almost as corrupt, if not possibly more corrupt, will step into that place. So it's like, unfortunately, there's going to be some kind of highest power in humanity, at least. Nature is obviously a higher power than all of humanity combined, because humanity is a small subset of nature. So nature ultimately, or God, or whatever you want to call it, the universe, multiverse, is in charge fundamentally. But as subsets of that, whoever is the nation that is on top wants to be in charge. So if anyone's going to be a superpower, you might as well want it to be you or something affiliated in some institutional manner with you or protecting you, which fundamentally as an individual, it can only be coming down to you yourself physically and however you can protect your own home and your own belongings, because you're going to be your own first responder with respect to yourself and not some government or military or police or anything that's minutes or days delayed from that, right? So yes, you can only protect yourself fundamentally, but if there's going to be any higher level protections, you're going to be wanting to have those, pointed away from you rather than towards you, I guess, in terms of weaponry and these superpowers.
Right. I mean, yeah, kind of going with what you're saying. I mean, there's no global entity that is kind of like acting as the checks and balances for all the nations. I mean, so everyone has the freedom to. So basically, you can't keep everyone at the same level. Someone's going to be number one, right? So if that's the case, then you might as well fight to be number one, because someone else will if you don't, and you might as well not accept being weaker than someone else. So it's all just like playing on this knack for survival and trying to be the survival of the fittest kind of thing, right? It's like, well, that there's no organic power regulating everyone, and you want to be the fittest, so you're just going to have to naturally want to fight to be the fittest, and that's all this is, right? And I guess, yeah, just agreeing with what you're saying basically, but on the survival of the fittest point of view again in terms of nations. But it just makes sense to want to stay on top, right? I mean, once you're on top, once you're alpha, why would you willingly I don't know, demote yourself kind of thing? It's like, oh, I'm such an altruistic alpha that hey, someone should just pass the baton, pass the torch. Someone should feel what it's like to be this powerful. It's like, no, F that. If you're up there, you stay up there as long as you can. Apparently that's the more organic way to look at survival, which makes sense, and long-term survival throughout the generations as well, right? So anyway.
Right. So politics is the art of control, and so you would want to be the one who is in control of as much as you possibly can be, which kind of explains your notion there of once you have control, you're not going to relinquish it as long as you possibly can, and that's apparently a natural tendency. And of course, there's always a target on your back. Whenever you're in control, there's going to be many different other competitors who want to grab that control and fight you potentially to the death for the level of control that they wish to take from you. So it's kind of this weird double-edged sword, because it's in a sports-related fashion, sports is just simulated war and simulated battle, right? So within
Right.
an athletic construct, competition is said to bring out the best in people, because you're challenged to go to your 100% or your 110% and red line when you're up against someone who's very good at a certain sport. You really have to bring out the best in yourself to have a chance, and you have to be on your A game, right? So
Right.
competition showcases the top, or the superior, like highest level of strength in humanity as far as it can exert itself. However, the double-edged sword in that is competition is also war. And does war bring out the best in us? I guess it brings out the worst in us, because war is about total conquering and humiliation and devastation of the warring tribe on the other side of the fence. So it's like, does competition bring out the best in us, or does competition bring out the worst in us? I guess, unfortunately, it just is kind of both, and it's that double-edged sword of, like, it's just this natural principle that competition brings out the extreme points of whatever system is competing with another system, right?
Well, it's like the whole yin yang thing. In order to have balance, you need to have both extremes, right? And you need to be able to experience both extremes and be one with both extremes, and not have to negate one versus the other kind of thing, or focus on one versus the other. You have to be able to, like, fully, like, I don't know, you just have to accept everything for what it is, like both positive and negative, and then go from there to create whatever it is you think is stability, right? But then,
Right.
I think the balance is difficult, I guess, right? It's
Yeah.
what we're trying to figure out here, which is impossible to figure out. Is what is true balance? I guess there's no absolute balance, because that changes with reference frame. It's like there's no absolute there's no objective reality, there's no absolute perfection, just like there's no absolute balance or objective balance or anything like that, right? It's just whatever balance is within the reference frame, looking at the reality, which basically means there's no one real solution. It's just one approximate solution that probably will make 80% of the people, like, happy, but then 20% of the population will cause like 80% of the damage during that kind of revolution, or whatever ensues from disconnect in what we're saying between a nation and people. Right, so,
Right, the Pareto
anyway.
distribution, yeah. 80-20 principle, or
Right.
in some other sense, the square root of your workers produce about half the productivity, which
or
apparently
some
comes
golden
out to
ratio.
about 20-80 or so. So
Right. Or the golden ratio is 7. It's also a 7-8-6 versus a 20, like 2-1-4, right? So
yeah,
it's the same thing. Yeah, I mean, yeah, and I think, I mean, anyway, yeah. In the end of the day, it still depends on how you look at it, I guess, which is super lame, because then there's no definitive truth to anything. But then I guess that's the name of the game, right? It's like, well, everything's just kind of like this yin yang whirlpool thing, and you just kind of like, it's like always spinning, and you just like point at it, and like the moment where it lands is wherever it lands, kind of thing, and you just have to deal with that one moment. But then that's like the only way to do it, aside from, like, I don't know. Basically, people are just trying to, like, be too definitive in, like, a particular action within a certain, like, moment in time to, like, define what it is they stand for, and like what it is that means to, like, resolve a certain situation. It's like, no, it's like a more organic, flowy thing than that. And I guess before we realize all that, like, before everyone can stop, like, going down the rabbit hole and, like, pigeonholing themselves in all these individual, like, ways of thought and, like, beliefs and whatnot. Before that, like, it's, like, pretty difficult to, like, on a very organic level, like, unify, quote unquote, everyone's way of thought in terms of anything, let alone, like, what's a nation and what isn't. And so I guess, what am I getting at? Basically, like, social media can be the tool used to unify everyone, but obviously it's not set out to do that, which is my conclusion. It's like, well, it could easily just be like, hey, everyone, like, this is what you should think right now in order to, like, improve, like, organic society to, like, its full potential kind of thing. But no, it just, like, opens up the mediums to, like, a disagreement and, like, all this, like, I don't know, like, FOMO FUD stuff. Like, I don't know, it's weird. It's like,
Right.
well, it's just causing more chaos and distortion than actual, like, cohesion, right? Which is what it is very, very capable of doing. Which then makes me think, okay, well, if this is just like a result of this open, decentralized thing that's just acting as an echo chamber because that's how it's being treated organically by its users, then that's fine. But I don't think it's that. I think it is, like, intentionally set up to be this chaotic, distortive echo chamber. It's like,
Well, it's
like,
all for the
actively
earnings. Yeah, it's this corporate
right,
earnings spiel. So
right. Well,
going back to what you're saying
yeah,
on
yeah.
the notion of competition and what we were discussing
Sure.
earlier, yes,
Sure,
what we
sure,
need
sure.
is more truth. And unfortunately, one of the darkest truths, war is necessary, or another one related being there's nothing unfair about love and war, or all is fair in love and war. Some of the darkest truths you could state, in my opinion, because it means that, well, nothing's really fair, just whatever happens, right? So the thing that we need, though, is truth, and what we need with respect to the truth is the fact that conflict exposes levels of truth that are on a greater spectrum than we're used to being in touch with as far as so-called polite society, because conflict, meaning breaking the rapport of fake politeness and society, exposes the limits of our own actions and thoughts of what is good and what is bad, and the fact that competition brings out the best and worst in humanity, and those limits, as you're implying, are not defined. We don't know what the absolute lowest or highest state is, and there's no 0 point below which we can't descend farther or climb higher above, meaning we don't know the absolute center of humanity, but the limits can be pushed farther if we are more truthful and actually decide individualistically, all of us, to decide we're going to not agree to disagree, but we're actually going to disagree and see how that resolves, however it resolves. And that's a scary thought for a lot of us with respect to a lot of conflicts, because we like to avoid conflict a lot of the time. Some people, if they don't like avoiding conflict, we call them bad people or something. We call them dramatic or, potentially even violent, but we have kind of this violent nature if we're a warlike tribal people, unfortunately, and the conflict kind of exposes the reality of our limits, perhaps, and maybe that's more of what we need, instead of this phony kind of everything is all good all the time and we're only going to portray the positives. And maybe what we need to expose more of the truth is more breaking of the rapport and more telling it like it is, which maybe we're on the wrong track in some levels of social media and all, but maybe some of it, and cutting through the BS, has to do with the authenticity of the current commander-in-chief, and maybe that guy Trump has some kind of resonance that, hits the forefront of many people's minds on levels that they didn't realize could be touched, I guess. Maybe he's telling it like it is on a level that kind of exposes the BS of it all in a way that hasn't been done in potentially a long, long time. Even going to the level of deciding to see if we can fund the government with tariffs and see how much we can get away with lowering the taxes on income, and seeing if we can go all the way back to the pre-1913, pre-World War I, pre-income tax days when the government was funded with tariffs. So that's kind of what I was thinking there.
Yes.
But yeah, it comes back to, like you're saying, the yin-yang of not knowing the absolute limits of things, but perhaps what we need is more conflict, unfortunately, because it exposes the reality of things, and what we need is the truth and the reality of things, which happens to be a lot of people having a lot of pent-up emotions that they wish they stood up and got out, but they kind of don't because we bottle it in or whatnot. So maybe that's what we need, more of conflict and resolution of conflict, which happens very quickly once escalations start, which Trump seems to be highly motivated to start, at least.
Well, I agree with the whole name dropping thing there, but yeah, but I guess to go along with what you're saying, I think the what was I gonna say? I mean, we're looking for the ultimate truth, and the ultimate truth is a balance of good and evil, right? But we've all been convinced as a society through social media, whatever it is, to just focus on the good, right? Which isn't the truth, and and the greatest, I guess the great truth is the greatest good, right? So then if we
Right.
only focus on the brightness, the bright half of the yin yang, thinking it's it's good, and we're only focusing on the good part. Obviously it's good. It's like, well, no, but a true good, organic good, is actually the balance between what you think is good and what you think is bad. But then that change, like what you were saying, getting everyone to focus, to not just focus on what they think is quote unquote good, and also to focus on the bad, and then reflect and zoom out and be like, oh yeah, after being able to balance what I used to think was good and what I used to think was bad, now I know the greater good. Like, in order for people to do that, that is like a huge fundamental shift in their mindset. You know what I mean? So, but I see what you're saying. It's like that's what needs to be done, though. What needs to be done is to convince people, like, yeah, the greater good is to look around and accept what's negative around you and balance that out with what you know is good. And somehow that creates the yin yang, or like a greater good, basically, right? Which is what we all strive for. But then no one thinks about that really, and then somehow, like, as an overall American, like the average American doesn't think that way, which sort of troubles me. Which is why I think that we will go through some sort of social revolution at some point, because, like, what we're talking about here needs to happen, and when it happens, a lot of people are going to get pretty upset over it, right?
Right.
So,
And there are people
but
who are kind of negative thinkers who will bring out only the bad as well. So it's all about the balance and hoping that
right,
you can insert positive and negative energies into things to kind of stake your claim for where the truth lies and see what other people's middle grounds are, where their mindset is, where their truth lies, and seeing within that conflict how it resolves itself in order to perhaps pay it forward to create a greater overall community, culture, and society and civilization. And it's about whether we pay it backwards or pay it forward, right? Do we have this
sure.
resentment of thinking, well, I cannot forgive and forget. I won't forget, and therefore I will not forgive either. And my trauma and my grievances and what I feel like I'm entitled to because I've been wronged in the past needs to be fulfilled before I'm willing to make myself greater. And that kind of turning away from each other allows everyone to kind of pay it backwards and disincentivize the greater good,
Right.
and including the ability to tell the truth, whether things are good or bad. And I think we just need that momentum of deciding that everything that you think is a grievance and a kind of victim status that you have, or something that has been a wrong against you, that's very, very hard to litigate, legislate, find out, prosecute, and actually make amends for, or bring to justice on the level that you think justice is very, very difficult. And it's also basically impossible, and everyone has those kinds of things. And so it's the kind of social intelligence of knowing that everyone has had something happen against them that is never going to be made amends with, or brought to absolute justice, because unfortunately there's nothing orbiting in absolute justice, like in reality of this physical world we're dealing with, unless we turn to kind of the spiritual natures of these karmic influences, or what goes around comes around, or you're going to get what you deserve in the end or something. It's like,
Right.
maybe perhaps that's why we may need religion, we need spirituality, and we need some kind of level of explanatory power of kind of getting over our gripes and getting over the things that we think are wrong against us, to unify into some kind of grace of seeing the greater good in everything, seeing the good in everyone, including our enemies, in order to somehow kind of try to, in a momentous fashion, pay it forward and still see the good side of things, like differentially, not to only see the good side of things, but to see the good and the bad and try to push the middle to make things better over time. So I guess that's my kind of model of how we could approach, in a general sense, how to make the world a better place. You have to do it by being the change you want to see in the world, but that's kind of whether all individuals decide to do that or not kind of determines it, right? So do we pay it backwards or do we pay it forwards, I guess?
Yeah, the older I get, the more I believe that all these religions that have lived and died throughout our human civilization, they were onto something. I mean, the aspect of creating a religion. I mean, it's acknowledging the good and bad in what is around you, and then focusing on what you can extract from it as good, right? And that seems to be a prevailing concept across most religions, that like old religions that have are still surviving today. I mean, they're surviving because they kind of have this aspect, I believe. And what we've done as a society is we said, well, no, we're individual thinkers. We're not going to trust these religions anymore because we're not going to let these religions tell us how to think. We can think for ourselves. But then what happens when you think for yourself? You start to pigeonhole yourself, apparently, on what is only positive and not just a negative. Right, but in order to appreciate the positive, you have to know what's negative. Otherwise, you're just floating around with no real reference frame, just looking at all these quote unquote positive things, like all these euphoric rushes, like memes and 15-second videos on reels and stuff. It's like, well, what is your baseline? Your baseline should be somewhere really far down that you can come back to every once in a while to know how good you have it when you're not in it, right? So that's kind of lost now in common society. And I guess it's one of the aspects I was getting at earlier about how we're all trapped in social media, is that we don't have this ability to look at both the positive and negative and then decide for ourselves what is positive anymore, which apparently is the more organic way of living. So,
right,
anyway,
and well, we do kind of need this motivational spiritual characteristic of the fact that because we have these grievances, because there is injustice in the world, because there are these wrongdoings that we think need to be made, justice related, we need this kind of story that, well, it's still right to do the right thing, even if you personally, as a physical being, never end up getting paid for it or never end up benefiting as an individual that you divide yourself up as separate from the rest of society, which none of us are totally separate from it, right? But it's like, in order to care about the existence of things beyond your own physical lifespan, we almost kind of need this principle of, well, on a spiritual level, it's worth doing the right thing, even if it never only pays off for us, like literally just our own bodies, our physical existence. So I guess that's why back in the day, people felt motivated that, well, even if it doesn't benefit you individually, it's still worth doing the right thing, because eventually when we're all dead, in our afterlives or whatever, things will be made greater over time afterwards because of our own rights and our own good deeds in this life. So you have to somehow believe, if you want a continuity of life for those who live beyond your own physical life, you have to see the greater good enough to actually still want to do it. So I guess I'm still going off on the see the greater good and then do that ideology. But I guess I'm explaining why we kind of still need this spirituality. We kind of still need some kind of unifying, basically religion, which unfortunately, because all institutions are corruptible, we often, those who are scientifically, analytically minded, kind of some people who go off in kind of atheistic mentalities or pantheistic or non-theistic mentalities, decide as a naysayer to say, religion is stupid, people who believe in God are delusional, and it's all about science now, because we can think for ourselves now, even though sucking up to mainstream scientific consensus is also a way of not necessarily being all that critically minded or that much of a critical thinker, because at the end of the day, science just means knowledge, and it's how you come to that knowledge that is really the way to do it, rather than simply believing an outside source to become just as religious as you thought you were becoming better than, in a way. You know what I mean?
Right. Okay, this is kind of dark, but I guess, in terms of survival, organic survival, you as in any organism, you want to do what you believe is the best that will perpetuate your kind, throughout the next few generations or whatnot. But if you already believe that you are the strongest organism on this planet, that you don't need to do the things to perpetuate your kind in the near future, then at some point it has to drop to the point where you get scared. You start to have to reevaluate whether or not you truly have the ability to naturally just be number one organically. And that's what we kind of need as humans, is like this shock factor of like, wait, hold on, like we're not actually as good as we think we are. We need to try a lot harder organically in order to like maintain this human thing like over the few thousand years. Like I feel like humans need that moment, and that's a huge like inflection point in all of human civilization, right? The realization that wait, we're not number one as organisms. Like we need to try a little harder in order to maintain what we thought we had, right?
Right, because defining yourself as number one is very easy. It's just self-imposed. Right. It's circular. Being number one as recognized by separate independent bodies is very difficult. And getting to number one is difficult, but staying number one in a competitive environment is even more difficult. And that's what we want to sustain. Much more difficult than anything we can, justify just by saying we're automatically good, which is the kind of mindset that a lot of people have gone into, that, oh, we're good because we are the good side of ourselves and we portray ourselves as good and we're good people, so even though it looks like we just did something inconsiderate, oh, I'm not a bad person, I wasn't trying to do exactly what I just did, didn't mean to do that, man, I'm a good person and all this. So, I mean, I guess you see little aspects of social dynamics like that sometimes, where it's like people define what they just did as not what they just did in order to seem better and kind of explicitly deny what they just did, But regardless, I think as we reach almost the 2-hour mark here in the podcast, I think we will wrap it up with this. So as we reach the end of our StatGDP podcast, from atoms to ethics, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to leave us with? Where's my couch?
Well, no, just strive hard to realize your worth in society and stay positive on that outlook.
Right, my friend. So thanks so much for joining us. This has been StatGDP with Fool Me Twice and Where's My Couch. We will see you guys next time. Signing
Peace out.